There's perhaps no person more dear to the CUFI family than the man I'm about to present to you, Irving Roth. Irving first connected with us in 2009 when he personally led a tour of CUFI campus students through the ash-strewn fields of the Nazi death camps in Poland. He courageously and graciously shared his heart-wrenching story of surviving the horrors of Auschwitz and losing his family with our young people, opening their eyes and their hearts to the reality of what happens when Christians fail to speak up when they see their Jewish brothers and sisters being threatened. That trip was the beginning of a long and beautiful journey as Irving made an impact on the lives of tens of thousands of CUFI members and CUFI campus college students. In the last 9 years, this unwavering Holocaust survivor has crisscrossed the country to speak at more than 400 events, and he has forever touched the hearts, and everyone who has heard his testimony has been forever changed. Because of Irving Roth, an entire generation of CUFI on-campus students has personally heard the living witness of a man who endured the most horrific experience of imagination and remains one of the most compassionate and gracious human beings that we at CUFI have ever had the honor of getting to know. Irving's legacy of truth and love and his dedication to his call to action have inspired thousands of Christians' lives. Today, it is our humble privilege and high honor to present Irving Roth with the Living Witness Award for his brave and inspiring testimony that has left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of countless Christians in the United States of America. This plaque reads, "He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust." Psalms 91, 1 and 2. Irving, you're a blessing to every person who has ever met you. God bless you, and thank you so much for all you've done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My friends, it is with deep humility and gratitude that I'm accepting this unusual, most marvelous, prestigious award. I'm indebted to all the people of CUFI for the privilege they have afforded me to speak to hundreds of churches, schools, and synagogues. It was 79 years ago that my happy, carefree life was turned into a nightmare. Through legislation of civilized people and countries, I was turned into a non-person, to be disposed of as refuse in the gas chambers of Europe. This transformation, my friends, took place while Western democracies looked down, they did nothing. There was no outrage that millions of people are being murdered because who they are. And certainly there was no action. The gates to freedom were closed to me as a Jew. I had no homeland. There was no escape. In 1947, after 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people returned to the land that God promised Abraham, where the Jews hoped to live in harmony and peace with their neighbors. Unfortunately, the anti-Semitism and hatred of 8 decades returned with a vengeance. People on the way extreme left and right and middle, people claiming to be liberal and fundamental Islam joined together in an unholy alliance to destroy the Jewish people again. My friends, today, hatred of the Jewish people is not only permissible in the whole world, it's almost fashionable. But standing here today in front of you, it's different than it was 79 years ago. The Jewish people are not alone. Let the ruthless enemy know that. Part of the American, British, and Canadian Christians have joined together into a force to make sure that this never happens again. They're ensuring that it's not only the existence of Jewish people, but the growth, the security of the Jewish people is never threatened again. Tomorrow, most of you sitting here, Christians united for Israel, will descend upon Congress of the United States in this city to lobby to make sure that the Congress of the United States, the government of the United States, the President of the United States, and the people of the United States never stop supporting Israel. And for that, my friends, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. On a slightly different spiritual plane, for many centuries, some Christian theology taught that I, as a Jew, have no connection to God. I've been replaced. I don't belong. My theology is worthless. You, CUFI, have changed that. You have repudiated in words and deed that theology is wrong. And for that, on that too, I'm thankful to you. But for all you're doing, and all you have done up till now and continue to do and grow, a simple thank you just doesn't seem to be enough. And so I want to recite an ancient blessing of the Torah upon you. Yavarechecha Adonai v'yishmerechu. May God bless you and guard you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'choneku. May God make his face shine unto you and be gracious unto you. Yisa Adonai, panav elecha v'yasim lecho shalom. May God lift up his face and give you peace. Chisku ve'imtzu. Maybe together go from strength to strength. And let us say, Amen.
In spring 2019, join Holocaust survivor and historian Irving Roth on a once-in-a-lifetime remembrance tour through Poland. His story of loss, survival, and hope will bring the pages of history to life as you walk through the streets of the infamous Warsaw Ghetto, the silent barracks of Nazi death camps like the one where Irving slept at Auschwitz, and the memorials to the heroes who risked their lives to rescue their Jewish neighbors from Hitler's evil plan. You'll be inspired and challenged to put your faith into action. You'll have the opportunity to interact with the local Polish Jewish community and meet with the daughter of a famous hero of the Holocaust, one of the righteous among the nations honored by the State of Israel. Take advantage of this rare opportunity to walk with and learn from Irving Roth as he takes you on a journey of his memories of life before, during, and after the Holocaust. To register for this historic trip to Poland with CUFI and Irving Roth, go to the CUFI website and sign up today.
Good afternoon, CUFI. Unbelievable conference, right? And it's going to keep getting better. I was just listening, as you were, to the incredible story about Irving Roth. And for you that are students of history, you'll remember, or you will know about reading that during World War II, Hitler bombed London night after night after night. It was the London Blitz. It went on for days, and then weeks, and then months. And then finally, one night, it didn't happen. And then a second night, it didn't happen. Hitler had given up. And a London newspaper ran a headline after all of that pain and suffering that said in bold letters, "Is that all you got, Adolf?" Germans met outside of Berlin to put together a plan to erase the seed of Abraham from the face of the earth. And they failed. And Irving Roth, every day, and all of you, every day that you stand up for the Jewish people in Israel, are saying to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and fascists alive today, "Is that all you got?" Because we will win and they will not. Our next speaker is somebody that's been fighting that battle his whole life. You know him. It's a little lazy when somebody is scheduled to introduce a speaker and they go, "A man that needs no introduction," and you know the guy didn't prepare to give the introduction. But in this case, Malcolm Hoenlein is somebody that does not need an introduction to this audience. He's spoken here, I think, every year. He's a passionate speaker. There's only two things you need to know about him, in addition to the fact that he's been president of virtually every Jewish organization in America at one point or another. Malcolm Hoenlein understood the phenomena of Christian Zionism at the national level before a lot of other Jewish Americans did. A lot of American Jews were very suspicious of us, and even of Pastor Hagee. What was our hidden agenda? It was Malcolm Hoenlein on the national level that told his fellow American Jews, "These people simply love us." That's their agenda. And one other thing you need to know about him. Harry Truman years ago said that Washington, D.C. was the kind of city where if you wanted a friend, you should buy a dog. I can't tell you how many dogs Carol and I have been through in the 30 years I've been in Washington. But Malcolm Hoenlein has been a friend of you, of CUFI. He's been a friend on the easy days when things were going well. There's a lot of friends on those days. But when you're in the arena that matters and you're having fights and there are bad days, as there inevitably will be, anytime there was a bad day, Malcolm Honline was on the phone encouraging us, standing with us, not running for the tall grass, which is what usually happens in this city. So I give you a fighter for Israel, for the Jewish community, and for Christians that love Israel, our friend and ally, Malcolm Honline.
Thank you. We don't have time for applause. They gave us a very strict schedule, and I'm going to be the one who's going to try to keep to it. But I'll take off my watch. You know, the story they tell of a Japanese visitor came to a synagogue with a Jewish friend, and every step of the way of the prayers, he would ask why at certain times we cover our eyes for concentration, why we do other things. And the gentleman explained, and when it came time for the sermon, the rabbi took off his watch and put it down, and the Japanese guest asked, "What does that mean?" He said, "Not a damn thing." So you'll all use it. It is really an honor and pleasure for me to be here. As I've said many times, even if I wasn't invited, I would show up, because I come here to get my batteries charged every year. And as much as you may love us, we love you. And nobody more than Diane and Pastor Hagee, my pastor, as I've said many times, to the consternation of my rabbis, of whom I have many, but only one pastor, Pastor Hagee. And how proud were we all when we saw him speaking to the world at the dedication of the Embassy of the United States in Jerusalem. There is no one whose heart wasn't touched. There was no one who wasn't moved by his incredible words. His very presence there is a tribute to all of you. It's a recognition by the government and the people of Israel and the government of the United States of how important you are. I have great admiration for Laura Ingraham. As you heard, I took her to Israel on that first trip in 2006, and I am wearing my DFZ badge because I figure if she can ordinate me as a rabbi, you can make me a daughter of the Friends of Zion. You know, when we come together, we so often complain about all the problems. You know, the Sears catalog of problems that we have, national, local, international. You know, it reminds me of the story they tell of a man who enlisted in a monastery, and he was told all the requirements. And he said, "I'm ready to accept it. I want to give up the materialistic way of life." And finally, at the end, he's told, "We have one special requirement. You're only allowed to say 2 words every 5 years." And he said, I accept, I want to enlist." And he came, and for 5 years, he did penitence, he prayed. At the end of 5 years, summoned to the chief monk's office, told, "You completed your 5 years. You're entitled to your 2 words. And he said, "Terrible food." 5 more years, he prayed and he did penitence. Again, summoned to the chief monk's office and told, "You've completed your 2nd cycle. You're entitled to your 2 words. And he said, "Hard bed." 5 more years, he prayed and did penitence, and again summoned for the 3rd cycle and told, "You're entitled to your 2 words. And he said, "Miss television." 5 more years of prayer and penitence. There is an end. 5 more years of prayer and penitence, and he's again summoned to the chief monk's office. And he looks at chief monk in the eyes and says, "Going home." And the chief monk said, "It's no wonder you did nothing but complain since you got here." So often we complain, but too often it's warranted. And that's why the words of Irving Roth resonate with us so much. I had the privilege of going with him to Auschwitz, to Poland on numerous occasions, but the most exciting was when my grandchildren literally sat on the floor of the bus to listen to him and hounded him, these teenagers for whom you know all the attractions, and to get them to focus the way he did and the patience he demonstrated. And he sat, and then on Sabbath afternoon, they said, we don't want to do anything else. We just want to go and see Mr. Roth. And they again went and sat on the floor so that he could talk to them. He has educated so many, and he has done so much despite all that he went through. It didn't let it bring it down. It charged him up. It made him gave him a sense of responsibility that is so often lacking in this world. And we thank him. This is an age of indifference, of apathy, of ignorance. We see so much in a time of such complexity, of globalization, when everything is interrelated. We see a generation that has no patience for history and no interest in it. So it depends on you. It depends on those of us who understand our responsibility at this moment. It all depends on how we see ourselves. You know, when Moses sent the scouts to check out the Holy Land, and they came back with the report, the 10 who had a negative report said, we are like grasshoppers in their eyes. The giants didn't say it. They said it, because that's how they saw themselves. If we see ourselves as grasshoppers against the enemies and the forces of evil in the world, then we're lost. If we understand that God has empowered us at this time to stand up and to take down the giants, to recognize that this is our mission on earth today, we have unique opportunities. You heard it described when the United States and Israel stand together against so many forces, that it's an opportunity for each of us, because it depends on us. Each of us can make a difference. It was Nachshon, when he put his foot into the Red Sea, that God said, now you're ready for the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea, because we had to first show that we were ready to take that leap of faith. Each of us faces challenges where we have to take that leap of faith. But be confident that ultimately the truth will win out. Don't be afraid and don't be intimidated. All of us. Today, truth is a victim. Mark Twain said 150 years ago that if you don't read a newspaper, you're ill-informed. If you read a newspaper, you're misinformed. It is even more true today than it was then. You cannot believe what you read. You can't believe what you hear. You can't even believe what you see. But just as dust outlasts metal, so will the truth outlast the lies. And so will Israel outlast all of her detractors, her deniers, or her destroyers, and her denigrators. In 1948, when Israel was created, President Truman wanted to recognize it, and did. But the CIA agents came in and said to him, Mr. President, don't do it. Israel won't last 2 years. Guess where Israel is, and guess where the CIA is today. Secretary of State Dulles said to Ben-Gurion, how can you claim this ancient homeland? Your people don't even know where it is. And he said, Mr. Secretary, you can ask any Jewish child in the world and many Christian children, how long did it take the Jews to come to their country? Who was their captain? What did they eat? Matzah. Can you tell me how many American kids can say the same about who founded America? It ended the discussion. On the way here today, I heard in New York and here the news reports. And I decided to change my discussion because of the nature of those reports. One was a public radio report that an Israeli soldier had been killed in Gaza. The only word missing was finally, because they wait for it. The fact that 100 Palestinians were killed, as they cited, more than 100, but they never mentioned that they were engaged in terrorism, that they were shooting at Israelis, that they were throwing firebombs across the border, that they were cutting through the fence, that they were trying to lay siege to the communities on the border, that they sent hundreds of firebombs that have destroyed 8,000 acres, that have destroyed nature reserves and forests. Hey, where are the environmentalists who are so quick to come out all the other times? We haven't heard them this time. Air pollution, come and see what's happening in Gaza. Look at the wildlife that's been destroyed. 1,500 acres of farmland that was producing, wiped out. That somehow missed this report. But that finally an Israeli soldier, as if there is some equivalence by those who are standing there defending a border, the armchair generals who say and write, why doesn't Israel use rubber bullets? Why don't they use water cannons? First of all, to think that Israel didn't think of it first is a bit funny. But I suggest to them, you go to the border with a water cannon and you try to see if it works. 80% of those killed were terrorists because Hamas told us they were terrorists. That wasn't in the report either. They don't talk about the fact that Israel carried out 50 air raids on one day, 41 on another, and not one civilian casualty. Is that an army that operates with the sanctity of weapons? More than any in the world. And what about the human shields? Where's the United Nations? Where are all those who are protecting children and children's rights? Where is their voice? So it's up to you to tell the truth. It's up to you to make sure they tell the truth. But they will only do so if they hear it from you, if they hear you raising your voice, if they hear you speaking out on this issue. The damage can't be undone, but at least maybe the truth can be resurrected. I heard another report about another freedom flotilla coming from Italy to Gaza. Well, if they wanted to be a freedom flotilla, why don't they bring medicines and foods and drop it off in Israel, which will deliver it to Gaza, and not violate an internationally accepted legal barrier established by Israel in accordance with international law to protect against terrorism, against the import of weapons. Do you see the hundreds of missiles that they have fired? Where did they come from? They were smuggled in, for the most part. And how many of you remember the Mavi Marmara, the ship for which the whole world condemned Israel for boarding it? And several people were killed, and they blamed Israel, and Turkey demanded reparations, until a few months ago, the very spokeswoman who told the world the condemnation of Israel admitted that they initiated the violence, that they tried to take the guns away from the Israelis, and that the Israelis did not do anything to them except in self-defense. How come the world didn't rally around that? And how come, again, they seek to portray a freedom flotilla as if it does any benefit when you have a regime in Gaza that will not benefit its people and competes with another Palestinian regime, both of which want to deny to the Palestinian people in Gaza both food, electricity, and fuel. It's not Israel, it's them. But the mayor of Palermo decided that the port from which they were leaving would be renamed for Yasser Arafat. So I suggest if you're going to vacation, avoid the Arafat port and let them know that you will. Israel today facilitated the move of almost 800 people, 400 white helmets from Syria. Those are the people who go in to try and protect civilians. This reporter, also on a public radio station, decided to describe it that Israel allowed them to cross over occupied territory in the Golan. Not a word that Israeli soldiers go in to take them out, risk their lives as they do every single day to bring children from Syria for treatment in Israeli hospitals. 6,000 Syrians have been treated. I went there 4 in the morning. It was freezing. And I had on flak jackets and coats and everything, and it was freezing. And I saw young Israelis. First, the snipers went out to check that there was no Hezbollah. They would go and bring busloads of children who are treated at Israel's expense, sometimes for 2, 3, 4 months. Where is the world thanking them? But it's up to you to tell the truth. Remind the world of which is the country that is willing to stand up for Syrian refugees. Young Israelis going into the camps in Jordan and Syria, bringing tons of food and clothing donated by Israelis. And I saw one ambulance bringing 3 huge guys who had been treated in Israel back to the border to return. And I turned to the general in charge and I said, aren't you concerned that one day they will turn against you? And he said, most likely they will, but that's what Jews do. The World Health Organization, despite all this, chose one country to condemn this year. The country that sent hospitals to Nepal or Haiti or Kenya or everywhere else that was a disaster. The one that took in Syrian refugees more than any country in the world and treated them and helped them. Guess which country it was? Not Syria, not Libya, not Sudan, not any of those countries that engage in all the torturous treatment. Just the state of Israel. Well, let me give them some news. In the time that they were busy writing up these condemnations, Israel became oil independent. Israel became water independent. 150,000 Chinese visit Israel this year. 60,000 Indians and 30,000 more. Every African country is running to Israel. Israel's GDP is equal to Iran, which has 10 times the population. All the prediction of Israel's isolation. Take a look at how many heads of state visit Israel every single week now. And by December, God willing, Israel will land on the moon. And again to the naysayers, those who won't tell the truth. Remind them of the visit of the President of the United States to Jerusalem. And I think, frankly, a bigger move than moving the embassy. When he put on a skull cap and he walked up to the wall and he started saying the Psalms and pointed at this and said, this is a Jewish holy place. After UNESCO, after ESQA, after all the United Nations resolutions, that tells the truth. And for all the naysayers and the worrywart who keep telling us how terrible things will be, there wasn't one demonstration anywhere in the Arab world against it. Because when you tell the truth and you do the right thing, the whole world sees it. So to UNESCO and ESQA and all of those who tried to deny 2,000 years of Christian history and 3,800 years of Jewish history, who took off the traditional Judeo-Christian names from all of our holy places. Let me just remind you that for 3 millennia, more powerful forces than you have tried, and they all failed and eventually disappeared, and so will you. But only if the good people, believing people, state our claims clearly, forthrightly, without fear. We are not grasshoppers. We are giants, and we have a great message, a divine message. Because if you don't, if they don't hear from you, you will hear from your grandchildren for failing them, for losing their heritage, for denying them their past, and ultimately denying their future that links all of the generations and all of us together. Just tell the truth. This year is the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, and I won't go into it because you heard from Irving. I don't believe this is 1939 because we have Israel, an independent Jewish state, with an army and an air force ready to stand to defend Jews wherever they are. Because we have a United States government that is willing to stand with Jews, denounce anti-Semitism, and those who purvey it. We have to, thank you to both of them. No. And it's especially important now when we see the rise of anti-Semitism. We see that Europe has learned very little. There has to be zero tolerance for intolerance. No more excuses, no more lies, no more distortions, no more feeding the crocodile in the hope that it'll eat you last, as Winston Churchill said was the appeasement of Europe in the past. No more. 4 times a day a Jew is attacked in Paris and in London and in Berlin. 10% of the Jews of Paris have left. I don't want any more memorials to dead Jews. We have enough. I want you to stand up for living Jews and a living Jewish state and to say we will protect them and we will stand with them. To the BDS movement, it's time to take the D out of the BDS movement and call for what it is. It's time for a real BDS movement. Build, develop, support Israel. And your children on campus are the forefront. They are the courageous spokesmen. Support them, recruit more, do all that you can. In this age of polarization, having their voices on campus is so important. And when we see the government of Ireland, the Synod of Ireland, adopting a BDS position, you know what? I think they should boycott Israel. That means don't use your computers, don't use your iPhones, don't use half the medicines you're using, don't go for an MRI because all of them have Israeli components in them. Recognize that this is a war against the Jewish heritage, Jewish history, Jewish people, Jewish nation, and the Jewish faith. And when they go against the Jewish faith, it's a war against Christianity as well. 10,000 Christians paid this year with their lives at the hands of extremists, Muslim extremists. You can't separate us. Those who hate know no boundaries. So for all of our sake, for all of our children, we have learned the consequences of silence. It is not an acceptable alternative. You have to speak out, and speak out clearly. You have to speak out in support of the sanctions against Iran. They are working. We see all of the European countries who said, oh, we will never let them implement them. We will stand by. We will guarantee for European countries. And all of a sudden they said, well, not us. The EU will do it. Then they say, no, the EU Investment Bank will do it. And the EU Investment Bank said, we're not going to do it. And all of a sudden Total pulls out. And then Peugeot. And now all the banking and the shipping and the airlines and everybody else is pulling out and standing with the people of Iran against that evil regime. So we have to stand with our government in imposing the new sanctions and make sure that they are implemented. Half of Iran is under a terrible drought. The people are suffering for it, but the government won't do anything for them. The corruption of this regime, 40% of the economy they control. Believe me, all the money that comes in. Germany talks about sending $300 million in cash. We know that that's fuel for terrorism. The rial has fallen by more than 50% this year. And then they announced that they have opened up the Fordo enrichment plant, first time in 2 years, that they admit that they have 900 tons of enriched uranium. Really? They gave up their nuclear program? Time to stand up and tell the truth. We will not allow Iran to become a nuclear power. America must stay in Syria to prevent it from dominating the 4 Arab countries, Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a, as they claim. We have to stop the Shiite crescent from being completed that will connect Iran with the Mediterranean. We will not let a new Persian empire be erected, and we will protect the people, all of the people of the region, against this terrible force, just as we will against the rising Ottoman Empire, building 17,000 mosques around the world in a Muslim Brotherhood spirit, sending them what they can say every Friday. And both of them building bases from Afghanistan to the Sudan, to Somalia, to Qatar, to Syria and the Mediterranean. It's our future and it's our security. So we must stand up and tell the truth. We don't want to see American troops involved again. But the way to do it is to show them, as President Trump did today, we are committed and we will stand for America's interests. We will defend it and defend our allies in every way that we have to. There are those who can't see the truth. No lenses, bifocals, even trifocals are going to help them. Those who are blinded by hatred, by media distortion, by ideologies that are baseless, by the hate peddlers, simply they have to open their eyes, their hearts, and their brains to the truth. We have to make sure that our young people, their hearts and their brains are open and their eyes see the revelations. Faith and belief are vital, but action is required to be fully meaningful. Each of us can change the world. Each of you can change the world. By being here, you are doing that. God looks to us. He said, I am doing all of these miracles. You've seen the return of the exiles to the Holy Land. You have seen so many miracles. How Israel exists today, every day, is a miracle. But he wants us to do our part. When Noah built the ark and he put all those animals on those planks, he knew they couldn't support hippopotami and giraffes and elephants. It was a miracle. So they asked, well, why didn't God build the ark already? If he was already doing a miracle, do the whole thing. The answer is because God wants us to do our part. He will do his part if we're there and do ours. So raise your voices, tell the truth. God will make sure it is heard. There can be no bystanders, no excuses, and no remorse later for what we failed to do. I will close with what I've closed for years, because I understand that many of you are first-timers. How many of you can name the 10 scouts who came back with a negative report about Israel? How many of you can name the 2 who came back with a positive report? That's the lesson of history. Those who stand with Israel are remembered forever. Those who go against Israel are written off to history. You will be remembered forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, can you believe that in about 6 weeks, we will mark the 17th anniversary of the brutal attack on the United States on the morning of 9/11 at the Pentagon here in Washington, the Twin Towers in New York, and in a plane over the skies of Pennsylvania. I remember in the days after that attack, turning on the television set and seeing in some parts of the Middle East people celebrating what had happened to us, dancing in the street, giving candy out to their kids. And I also remember in Israel and Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv seeing Israelis lower their flag, weep with us, declare a day of mourning with us. I remember there were other friends around the world too. Not as many as we hoped, but there were other friends. Later that week, the Queen of England, at the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, would order something that had never been happened before. The national anthem of a foreign nation would be played. The American national anthem was played at the changing of the guard. The next day, at St. Paul's Cathedral memorial service, witnesses said they saw something they had never seen before. The Queen was actually singing our national anthem. And then she went on later in the same service to join in the singing of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The last time she had done that was at the funeral of her first prime minister, Winston Churchill. But it wasn't just symbolism in Britain. In the years that would follow, 500 brave British men and women would die in Afghanistan alongside of us. Thousands more would be wounded alongside of us. I'd like you to welcome our next speaker, Colonel Richard Kemp, who was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Welcome him like the hero that he is.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid I've got a confession to make, literally a confession. I am one of the 2 Catholics in this room that Laura mentioned. I'm sorry, you needn't be so smug because you were all Catholics before the Reformation. And actually, looking around the room, some of you were literally around at the time of the Reformation. Okay. Maybe not the best idea. Anyway, my excuse for being here is that Pastor Hagee, he asked me to come along and be the warm-up act for Eric Steckelbach, who follows me. So that's what I'm doing here. I'd like to just to recognize a few people before I begin. The first one, we heard earlier on a very moving address from Irving. Of course, it's a miracle in many ways that Irving survived the Holocaust. There were many, many who didn't. And one person that I would like to remember today is a young British man called Gerald Suwain, who lived in England. He found himself in France when the Germans invaded. He was interned, and in 1942, he was transported from Pithiviers detention camp to Auschwitz on the 17th of July, the 17th of this month in 1942. On the 19th of July, he arrived at Auschwitz, and on the 22nd of July, yesterday in 1942, he was murdered in Auschwitz by the Nazis at the age of 15. I would also like to ask, are there any students in this room? That wasn't very good, actually. That was pretty feeble. You are the most important people here. You are the most important people here because your mission is to carry on the work of CUFI when all these old people in front of me here are no longer. So it's vital that you stay with this program. Are there any IDF soldiers here in the room? Yeah. There are some here, there are others who'll be with us tonight. And I'd just like to say, as a former British soldier, what a huge honor it is to be in this room with serving IDF soldiers. Are there any Brits here, apart from me? Yeah, 1 or 2? Yeah, okay, great to see you. We have a CUFI UK. Is Des here? Des from CUFI UK? Des, great to see you. They do a fantastic job in Britain. I'd like to also recognize one of the greatest supporters of CUFI and one of the greatest fighters for the right in the United States of America, Dr. Bob Shillman, who's here with us in the room today. And when I say fighter, I mean fighter in a literal sense. Those of you who know him know why I say that. Don't get on the wrong side of his right hook. And I'd also like to recognize another doctor, Dr. Harold Rode, a very good friend of mine, who is he's one of this country's leading experts on Islam and served under 4 presidents, the first one being President Reagan. I don't want you to work out who the last one he served under was, please. He couldn't help that. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak to you today about the 8th commandment. And being Catholic, there's a bit of an argument between Catholics and Protestants, as well as, I think, between Jews, about whether I mean the 8th or the 9th commandment. We have our differences, but because I have a mainly Protestant audience here tonight, I will refer to it as the 8th commandment, which is, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. I checked that. I found a pastor here earlier on and checked with him, and he was correct. The whole of the conflict involving Israel and the Palestinians is all about lies. It's all about lies. That is what drives the conflict: untruth, deception, lies. We have a commandment that forbids us from telling lies. Israel's enemies have an element within the Quran called taqiyya, which commands them to deceive when it is necessary to advance the cause of Islam. And deceive, ladies and gentlemen, is what they are doing on a permanent and regular basis in relation to Israel. Unfortunately, too many others in the West, including my own country, other countries in Europe, go along with these lies. We don't just turn a blind eye to them, we also join in. We join in the chorus. And I'm delighted to say that that is no longer the case here in the United States of America. It is a lie that Jerusalem is not the capital of the Jewish state. How could Jerusalem not be the capital of the Jewish state? It's incredible. So that is a lie that, as our previous speaker mentioned, is spread by various world organizations, including the United Nations and UNESCO. When President Trump decided to open the embassy in Jerusalem, he expunged that lie. It wasn't just a new building being opened. It was a statement that no longer is the United States of America going to listen or tolerate this lie being told about the Jewish people. I had the honor of being present in the embassy when it was opened. I had an invitation from that great American, David Friedman, the US ambassador to Israel. I also had the honor of listening to a speech made by Pastor Hagee. Everybody I spoke to, and please don't repeat this, please. I know I can trust you, you're all Christians. Everybody I spoke to after that event said that Pastor Hagee's speech was by far the best speech in the whole occasion. Please don't tell Ambassador Friedman, Prime Minister Netanyahu, or President Rivlin that I said that. They wouldn't thank me. I also encountered lies shortly after, a few days after the opening of the embassy. I encountered lies at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva when I spoke there at an emergency session on the Gaza conflict. There was, to be honest with you, with the exception of 3 countries, Israel, Australia, and the United States of America, every delegation, every national delegation lied about what they were debating, which was the violence in Gaza. And I just want to read to you a statement made by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And he said, and this is a lie, everything he says is a lie, 87 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli security forces and over 12,000 people have been injured. The stark contrast in casualties on both sides is also suggestive of a wholly disproportionate response. On the Israeli side, one soldier was reportedly wounded. He could barely restrain his disappointment, slightly by a stone. Israel, as an occupying power, is obligated to protect the population of Gaza and ensure their welfare. But they are, in essence, caged in a toxic slum from birth to death, deprived of dignity, dehumanized by the Israeli authorities. From start to finish, that is a lie, and he knows that it's a lie. I listened to lie after lie after lie as every national delegation spoke and repeated similar bile against the state of Israel. And I made my speech, and I'm going to read to you what I said. I commanded British troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Balkans and Northern Ireland, and served with NATO and the United Nations. I have come straight from the Gaza front line to share my assessment. Based on what I observed, I can say that everything we just heard here is a complete distortion of the truth. For some reason, they didn't like that. The truth is that Hamas, a terrorist organization that seeks the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jews everywhere, deliberately caused over 60 of its own people to get killed. They sent thousands of civilians to the front line as human shields for terrorists trying to break through the border. Hamas's goal, in their own words, was blood in the path of jihad. I ask every country in this council, you have all been telling us that Israel should have reacted differently, but how would you respond if a jihadist terror group sent thousands to flood your borders and gunmen to massacre your communities? Your failure to admit that Hamas is responsible for every drop of blood spilt on the Gaza border encourages their violence and use of human shields. It makes you complicit in further bloodshed. If Israel had allowed these mobs to break through the fence, the IDF would then have been forced to defend their own civilians from slaughter, and many more Palestinians would have been killed. Israel's actions, therefore, saved lives of Gazans, and if this council really cared about human rights, it should commend the Israel Defense Force for that, not condemn them on the basis of lies. I don't know why, but I didn't receive any applause like that in the UN Human Rights Council. In fact, immediately after I spoke, the head of the Palestinian Authority delegation in the United Nations Human Rights Council stood up and said that man was paid $50,000 to say that. I wish I had been. I've often been accused of being in the pay of Mossad by people that can't accept the fact that somebody who's not Jewish and not Israeli can possibly speak the truth about Israel. And I know what an effective intelligence organization Mossad is. They've got one big problem. Their accounts department never write the checks. Ladies and gentlemen, how do I know what I said was true? How do I know what happened? Because as I said in my speech, I was on the front line of the Gaza border the day before I went to Geneva. I had sand from Gaza on my boots. I was taken forward by the IDF right to the very position where the snipers were located, where the observers were, where the commanders stood, where they watched what was going on and reacted accordingly. Every single one of those young men and women who I met there, many of whom were American lone soldiers serving with the IDF, every single one of them was putting their lives in danger 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to protect their own country. And at the same time, they were hearing news reports from CNN, from the BBC, and from other lying fake media organizations They were hearing themselves vilified and accused of being war criminals while they risked their lives. And of course, Staff Sergeant Aviv Levy, who gave his life a couple of days ago, was an example of exactly the risks and the threats that those Israeli soldiers faced. And by the way, Staff Sergeant Levy was murdered by a Palestinian wielding an Iranian-supplied sniper rifle. I've commanded British troops in situations similar to that, where we've had massed violent riots with terrorists hiding in among the rioters, in the hope that by us having to come forward and dealing with the rioters, they can shoot us or blow us up. I've dealt with that situation on numerous occasions, as have many British soldiers and American soldiers. And we know that what the Israelis did on the border with Gaza was what they had to do. We know as I told the United Nations Human Rights Council, if they hadn't done what they had to do, including killing people on that border, thousands and thousands of people would have broken through the fence and got loose in Israel, some armed, all with the intent of getting to the communities just a few hundred meters across the border and murdering everyone they could find in those communities. That's what they wanted to do. And if they'd have got there, if they'd been allowed to break through the border, the IDF would have had to kill many, many more than they in fact were forced to kill. What is it all about? What's it all about? It's really just an extension of Hamas's long-standing strategy. They use attack tunnels. They fire rockets. They do this from behind human shields. And the reason they do it, they don't believe for one moment that they can ever defeat the IDF or severely damage the IDF. They don't believe that for a moment. What they know is that by using those tactics, they will force the IDF to defend itself as every other army would and kill their own Palestinian people. That's what they want. They want dead Palestinians. It's what Professor Dershowitz from the United States called the dead baby strategy. That's what they want to do. They want to do it so that the rest of the world will condemn and isolate Israel for being war criminals. And it works because many parts of the world, many media organizations, many politicians, the United Nations, professors in universities, they play their assigned role. They lie. They lie about what the IDF are doing. They lie about what the Palestinians are doing. And that encourages them to use more human shields, to get more Palestinians killed. This is their entire strategy, and we play into their hands. I'm really delighted to say that today, in the Senate, Senator Cruz and some of his fellow senators introduced a new piece of legislation which is intended to levy sanctions against anybody using human shields or anybody supporting use of human shields. There is another big lie, and this is the biggest lie of the entire conflict. And that lie has been going on for 70 years, and it concerns so-called Palestinian refugees. A Palestinian girl that gives birth here in Washington, D.C. tonight, her child is a Palestinian refugee. She may have lived here all her life, never set foot in the Middle East, in any part of it, but her child, as she is a Palestinian refugee. And 20 years from now, when that child gives birth, her child will also be a Palestinian refugee. And on it will go. The Palestinian refugee population was estimated to be around 600,000 in 1949, around 600,000. Today, it's estimated to be about 5 or 6 million. It just grows, the problem grows. Every other refugee from every other conflict, they get integrated into society they've moved to, they become part of that society, not so Palestinian refugees, they remain refugees. The UN organization that looks after them exists to ensure they remain Palestinian refugees. And there's an estimate that by 2040, there will be, there will be 11 million refugees by 2040, 11 million, and by 2060, 20 million. And somebody has said that at some point, all life on Earth will be Palestinian refugees. In May 2012, the United States Senate Appropriations Committee approved a definition of Palestinian refugees to include only those original refugees who were actually displaced, whether they went of their own accord or were forced out. And the estimated number for them is not 6 million, it's 20 to 30,000. It is another lie, and it is a central lie of the entire conflict, and it needs to stop. And I'm happy to say that the current administration here in the US, if anyone's going to stop it, they will stop it from continuing. Believe it or not, even those Palestinians in the West Bank who originated from elsewhere in Israel, even those Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority has said they will not grant them citizenship in a new Palestinian state if one is ever formed, which it won't be. They won't grant them citizenship there because they're refugees. So those will, even if there's a new Palestinian state, those people will still remain refugees. It's absolutely incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has many concerns apart from the ones I've mentioned, apart from the ones around Gaza, and we've heard about some of them from Malcolm Hoenlein. They have concerns in the north in particular from both Hezbollah in Lebanon and also from Iran in Syria. They've got those things, they will deal with them, particularly with the help of the United States of America. But the concerns I've mentioned, the lies concerning the peace process, concerning Gaza, concerning refugees, these are problematic for Israel, but they are most problematic for the Palestinians, because it's those people, those poor people, who themselves are being enslaved and held in the most appalling conditions sometimes in refugee camps by their own government, by their own leaders, their own authorities, because they are no more than human shields. They're like human shields. They are bargaining chips to be used against the state of Israel. And it has to stop and it has to be ended. Those Palestinian people don't get much help from outside. There are organizations in the United States like Students for Justice in Palestine and the Palestinian Solidarity Committee in Britain and other such organizations. Those organizations don't exist to help the Palestinians. They exist for one purpose, and that is to attack Israel and to attack Jews. That's what they're there for. And, ladies and gentlemen, that is what the Palestinian leadership want. They do not want their own separate Palestinian state. They want one thing, and one thing only, the annihilation of the Jewish state. They don't even want the land of Israel. They don't want that. They just don't want the Jews to have it. That's the situation we face. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel's very strong. And we've heard from the last speaker how Israel will prevail. And the reason that Israel will prevail is because outside of Israel, Israel does have friends. And those friends include everyone in this room, this wonderful organization, CUFI. Keep up with your fantastic work, and you will watch Israel flourish and go from strength to strength. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Great job, Colonel. Okay, our last speaker, but certainly not our least, is somebody that you, I am sure, know. Some of our speakers this afternoon have pointed out how difficult it is to get the truth. Malcolm Honline said, you can't believe what you hear, you can't believe what you read, you can't even believe what you see. Colonel Kemp just outlined how big of a role lies play in the narrative about Israel, comparing it to a fascist regime. I mean, the world is upside down. If you want to be able to do this argument, if you want to be able to prevail, if you want to be able to counter the lies, you've got to find places you can go to that you can count on. You come to this convention, and we give you the antidote of truth to counter the lies. But you go back home, and every week there's a new lie. Every month there's a new narrative that you have to counter. We've got just the thing for you, and you know what it is. It's The Watchman. The Watchman, hosted by Eric Stakelbeck. Eric, in addition to that work, which he's doing, has written 3 books on the dangers of radical Islam. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not easy to do in the age we live in. This is not an age of Islamophobia. This is an age of truthophobia. And when somebody tells the truth, like Eric did in those books, you're marginalized, or at least they try to marginalize you. They haven't succeeded with him, and they're not going to succeed with him because he's part of this team. Eric Stakelbeck and The Watchman is the best source of truth this side of the Jordan River. Please give him a warm welcome.
Gary, thank you. I have a tough act to follow. Colonel Kemp, Malcolm Honline, Laura Ingram. Look, I know you're all tired. It's been a long day. I'm a little tired, too. We have Nikki Haley tonight. The one and only Pastor John Hagee, Ambassador Ron Dermer. I'll fill a little space for you between now and then. If you saw me yesterday, earlier today, folks, been speaking a few times here at CUFI. We've had some great speakers as well. I apologize in advance. I may repeat some of the things I said in earlier sessions, but there's one thing I must repeat. Now listen closely. This is of the utmost importance. I have to acknowledge it before all of you today. Today, July 23rd, is my wife's birthday. Lori, happy birthday. I love to put her on the spot. I wouldn't be standing here without her. I can tell you that much. So Lori, happy birthday. Okay. On to some more unpleasant subject matter first of all. But don't worry, we're going to end with encouragement. I want to exhort you today. And I don't say that lightly. You've heard throughout the last 2 days, Elliot showed off a number of great speakers, giving you a great overview of what's going on in the Middle East right now, what's going on in Israel, the threats gathering against America and Israel, because Israel and America's enemies, folks, are one in the same radical forces that seek to wipe Israel off the map, have a bullseye on the back of every single person in this room, and your kids and your grandkids. I do not exaggerate. That is a fact. So, you have an idea now of the threats and how it impacts you. That's the important thing, right? That's what we try to bring home for you here at Christians United for Israel on the Watchman Show every week. Why it matters to you. Many of my dear fellow Americans, and I love them, but they approach me and say, why Israel? Why should I care about this tiny nation the size of the state of New Jersey that's thousands of miles away? Why does it matter to me? I think you had a pretty good idea of it today from our speakers. I'm going to fill in some of those blanks as well. But what I want to do before I close out is to give you your marching orders. Because you can come here to CUFI, to the summit every year. You can come, be around like-minded great people, wave an Israeli American flag, maybe eat a falafel, then go home. and forget about it all. What do you do after the summit is over? The Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. You've got the knowledge now. Now, what are you going to do with it? Okay. Why does this all matter to you? Number one, we'll talk about Gaza, what's going on there today. Number two, Syria, and why it matters to you. Hint, Iran, Iran, Iran. In Gaza, I'll keep it short. What's going on there right now, folks, and I'm on the borders of Israel frequently. I'm in Israel 5 to 6 times a year. I'm a very lucky guy. I can tell you, as an American, I say this, I feel safer in Israel at 1 a.m. than I do Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York City. And that's a fact. Now, my wife's probably saying, what are you doing out at 1 a.m. when I'm not with you? My brownie points that I gained earlier, they're gone now. Israel's safe. But Israel has very bloody borders. Israel's a bastion of sanity, tolerance, security, and safety in a sea of tyranny and madness. Gaza is one example of that. Right now, these are not peaceful protests, in case you haven't noticed, and previous speakers said that. It's not me saying it. Folks, that's not an opinion about what's going on in Gaza. 2 reasons I say that. Number one, when you have AK-47s, explosive devices, Molotov cocktails, thousands of people violently charging a border, killing an Israeli soldier just 3 days ago. Call me crazy, but that's not a peaceful protest. It's not a peaceful protest. And really wrap your heads around this, folks, the level of depravity it takes to think of this, to take kites and balloons. It's a beautiful summer day. I have 2 little girls, 7 and 11. Take them out in the field and fly a kite. What Hamas is doing is they're literally taking kites. Really think about this. Kites and balloons, like you'd see at a child's birthday party. They're installing explosive devices inside these balloons or attaching them to kites. And they're using them as airborne arson devices. Now, some in the mainstream media, in the international community, have scoffed at this and said it's kites and balloons. Guess what? Those kites and balloons have burned and scorched 30,000 acres of land in southern Israel. 30,000. The farms in southern Israel, a vital engine of Israel's economy. Those kites and balloons are having deadly effect. You thought you'd seen it all with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Suicide bombers, rockets, terror tunnels. Terror tunnels. Wrap your head around this. Where tunnels are dug from Gaza into communities in southern Israel with the goal of, quite literally, popping out of a hole in the middle of your child's kindergarten, massacring innocent Israeli women and children, or taking them back to Gaza as hostages, just when you thought you'd seen it all. You have the kites and the balloons. Now, folks, let me ask you something. What kind of pure, unadulterated evil does it take for a group of Hamas leaders to sit around in some conference room somewhere in Gaza City every day and devise this kind of strategy? Here's what we're going to do now. We're going to take kites and balloons. We're going to light them on fire or insert explosive devices inside of them, and we're going to float them over the border and burn southern Israel. That's a special, unique kind of evil. And just a reminder, evil exists. There are no gray areas when it comes to Hamas. It's very black and white. They're evil. In these times of moral relativism, we need to be able to stand up and speak out boldly and declare it. That's pure evil. But the strings for all of this are being pulled from Tehran. When it comes to the truth and the lies, we'll talk about Iran in a quick second. When it comes to the truth and the lies emanating out of Gaza right now, you've been fed the line by the mainstream media, the European Union, the UN, that these are peaceful protests. Here's a great example for you. On May 14th, we had a CUFI contingent in Jerusalem for the opening of the embassy. History made, and it's never going back. History changed. On that day, I'm giving her another shout out, my wife, texted me as we were at the embassy opening and said, "You're not going to believe this. I'm watching the embassy opening ceremony right now on the news, but they have a split screen. On one side is the embassy opening and the ceremony. On the other side are scenes from Gaza, fire and Palestinians charging the border, with Israel portrayed and the Israel Defense Forces as the heavy-handed, bullying aggressor." She was outraged. I was outraged to hear about it. I was even more outraged over the next 2 days as the mainstream media reports leaked out and Israel was painted as the heavy-handed aggressor. The European Union called for an investigation into the IDF's conduct. Now, that was Monday, May 14th. Keep track of the timetable. 2 days later, May 16th, Wednesday, a report just happened to kind of float out there. A Hamas official, a top Hamas spokesman, said that, yes, you know, on Monday, 52 of our brothers were killed. Now, the media was up in arms. 60 people were killed. You would have got the impression these were women and children just exercising their peaceful right to protest, and they were mowed down by the Israel Defense Forces. A Hamas official said, yes, among those 60 people, 52 were our people. They were Hamas. So 52 of the 60 were Hamas terrorists. That's number one. Number two, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another Iranian proxy based in Gaza, said, yes, 3 of our people were killed. 52 plus 3 equals 55. So 55 of the 60 peaceful protesters who were mowed down by the IDF were terrorists, hardened terrorists. It's not me saying it, it's them saying it. And when evil men tell you they want to kill you, you should listen and take them very seriously. So over 90% of the 60 killed on May 14th were terrorists. The other 5 may have had either a terror link or, unfortunately for them, might have been used as human shields by Hamas, because what they do, these are not guys with beards in caves, folks. Don't get it wrong. Don't get it confused. They're very savvy, they're very smart, and they are very strategic. And they will strategically and in a premeditated way put women and children and teenagers on the front lines for the cameras. And guess what? The media swallows it hook, line, and sinker. That's why we do The Watchmen, to bring you the truth. I say all that to say, here's your big takeaway. That report came out on May 16th from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The truth came out. These were not peaceful protests. These were terrorists who were killed in an act of aggression and war and violence against the Israel Defense Forces, who were defending Israeli sovereignty and territory and the Israeli people. There was never one retraction issued. None by the mainstream media. You would think maybe that night CNN or the BBC would say, you know, on May 14th, we issued a report, folks, 60 people were killed. We wanted to clarify that. 55 of the 60 were actually terrorists. Never a clarification. I'm still waiting. I think I'll be waiting a long time. I mentioned Iran being the head of the snake, and don't worry, it gets better. Don't be discouraged. I promise we will encourage you before you leave these seats. But we have to talk about the head of the snake, Iran. And I want to tie it back to you again real quick and why it's so important. If the mainstream media is not going to report on these things, 55 of the 60 killed in Gaza, terrorists, that's where you come in and we come in. If you're here today, you're not here by coincidence. You've been called for such a time as this. Hey, it's the middle of July, summertime. You could be anywhere. But you took a week or a few days to come here to the swamp and make your voices heard. You could be anywhere. Don't underestimate the importance of what you are doing. Because I can tell you, the IDF realizes what you're doing. The Israel Defense Forces now, when something happens, including on May 14th, the hostilities along the Gaza border, they're calling us and they're saying, look, you need to help us get the message out. You need to help us get the message out. We can't do it without you. If we don't do it, no one else will do it. I repeat, if we, everyone in this room, if we don't do it, no one is going to stand up and do it. Like it or not, you can't just leave this auditorium today. You can't leave Washington, D.C. and go back home and forget about this. You've been called. You have a mantle. You can't run from it. That didn't work out so well for Jonah. And it won't work out well for us. The European Union will not stand up for Israel and the Jewish people. Russia, China, the Arab League, they're not going to stand up and make their voices heard. The UN, only the people in this room. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. You are the special forces in this movement. I love to quote Chronicles. The Bible talks about the men of Issachar, the sons of Issachar. The Bible says they were an elite group of 200 men who surrounded King David. They knew the signs, they knew the times, and they knew what Israel should do about it. If you're in this room today, you are the modern day men and women of Issachar. You're from all over the country. Some might come from farms, some might come from the big city, all sorts of different ethnicities, races, socioeconomic backgrounds. But this motley crew has all, and I say that in a loving way, has all been gathered here in this movement in CUFI at this convention center for such a time as this. You're not here by coincidence. You're not here just to have a good time and forget about it and go home. Again, if you don't do it, no one else will do it. A day is coming when you're going to need to stand up and be counted. I can assure you, not everyone will be on stage speaking. We all have a unique role and a unique niche to serve and to fulfill in this fight for Israel, for America, for all that is good and true. You cannot hide from your responsibility. The big one, as they say, is coming. Winston Churchill, one of my heroes, talked about the end of the beginning. We've had some major victories in the past year. The embassy has moved to Jerusalem. President Trump has pulled out of the disastrous, diabolical Iran nuclear deal. The Europeans are hanging on, though. It's going to work. If we give them money, they'll like us. They just know it. The Taylor Force Act is passed. 3 major victories that you helped make happen. We're riding high right now. but it's only the end of the beginning. The greater fight, the greater battle, the greater struggle is still to come. I'm looking at Syria. I'm looking at Iran. Iran is in Syria to stay. If we politely ask them to leave, they're not going to leave. There's a collision course right now. Israel has drawn a red line. They've said to Iran, we will not let you establish a beachhead and a permanent presence in Syria at our northeastern doorstep. We're not going to let it happen. Iran, on the other side, has said, we're not going anywhere, we're here to stay. Syria is a linchpin. It's a crucial battleground in our ideological mission to wipe Israel off the map. Iran is committed to surrounding Israel on all sides and squeezing it like a vise. They're not leaving Syria. And Israel won't let them stay. Hezbollah is also in Syria. Hezbollah is Iran. They're indistinguishable. It's an arm of Iran. They're armed to the teeth with 150,000 rockets and missiles blanketing every inch of Israel. Collision course. Hezbollah is now becoming an existential threat to the Jewish state. Thousands of Iranian-backed militias are also in Syria. Iran has a powerful friend in the form of Russia, also in Syria. Turkey's getting in the mix as well. Some of the world's worst actors have all gathered in one place. Eventually, folks, a day of reckoning is coming. I'm just speaking the truth. You know it in your heart. I know it. We saw conflicts in Gaza 2008, 2012, 2014. That's child's play to what we're going to see eventually. I'm not trying to scare you, be sensationalistic or alarmist. I'm telling you this for a reason. At that time, things will get ugly and things will get nasty. The IDF, in terms of rules of engagement and being the most humane fighting force in human history. I don't say that lightly. Going to extraordinary, unheard of lengths to avoid civilian casualties, to the point where the IDF will actually put its own soldiers in some cases in jeopardy in some ways to avoid killing Palestinian civilians. Even so, it won't be portrayed like that in the world press. It won't be portrayed like that at the UN, which has passed more resolutions against Israel than any other nation. It won't be received like that in the EU. What I'm saying to you is this: things are going to get bloody and nasty. It's easy to be Israel's friend when the going is good. The embassy moved, the Iran deal's dead. It's easy then, you're riding high. What will you do when the entire world is howling that Israel is not David, but Goliath? That Israel is the problem and not the solution in the Middle East. Will you run for cover then? It won't be as popular to wave that Star of David, that beautiful flag. Or will you stand up and earn your keep? It's coming eventually. And if you don't do it in this room, no one else will do it. You have a mandate from God Almighty. I don't know if you knew what you were getting into when you came into this hall today. Just want to hear a few good speeches and go home and, sorry, it doesn't work that way. If you are here, you've been called here. You didn't just show up here by chance. The day is coming when the special forces, the men and women of Issachar, will have to stand up and be counted for Israel, for the Jewish people, for America. That day is coming. 24 hours, less than 24 hours as I wrap up here. I'm going a little bit over. Less than 24 hours after Iran and Israel went at it back in May, Iran, in an act of war, launched 32 missiles from, surprise, surprise, Syria at Israeli territory. None of them reached Israeli territory. Thank God for Iron Dome. And thank God for poor Iranian aim. Less than 24 hours after that happened, we had a CUFI contingent on the Golan, where the night before it was fireworks. This is how important your role is. Listen to me very closely, folks. One of the top spokesmen for the Israel Defense Forces, we said, look, we talked to him, should we still come? I mean, there was war last night. He said, you must come. Now more than ever, you must come. We need CUFI to tell the story to the world. Because if you don't do it, no one else will. That is the importance of what you're doing. That is the importance of you being here today. Do not underestimate what you are doing. I like to say that, people often say to me, man, I wish I lived in Bible times. It must have been great back then. Guess what? You're living in Bible times today in 2018. Be encouraged. God is moving in the land of Israel in a magnificent, miraculous way. I'm there all the time, folks, and I see it with my own two eyes. Medical, scientific, high-tech breakthroughs. Take out that iPhone and send a text message, made in Israel. There's a water crisis in California. Israeli scientists are there solving it. There's a hurricane in Houston, an earthquake in Mexico City. Israeli first responders are the first on the ground. If there is a cure for Alzheimer's or cancer found in the next few years, guess where it will be found, in my humble opinion? The land of Israel. Be encouraged. God has harnessed the resilience, the genius, the ingenuity, the creativity of the Jewish people in one special, beautiful, glorious land. And guess what? They are stepping into their destiny as a light unto the nations. Man, oh man. Closing thought. Now I'll let you get something to eat. You've earned it. God has a sense of humor. And I say that because every time the UN passes a resolution denying any Jewish claim to the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, no, really, they deny any Jewish claim to Jerusalem. Common sense, Jerusalem, Israel, one and the same. But today, common sense is not so common. But every time these resolutions come out, folks, like clockwork, I do not exaggerate, there's some new press release from the Israel Antiquities Authority saying, oh, guess what? We just found a 2,500-year-old seal of King Hezekiah from the time of the prophet Isaiah. Oh, by the way, we're uncovering the ancient pilgrimage road where pilgrims, you can read about it in your Bible, they cleansed themselves in the pool of Siloam. They went up and ascended the Temple Mount on that very pilgrimage road. It's being excavated right now. They're finding 2,000 and 3,000-year-old coins. I know, I've held them, I've seen them, I've walked that pilgrimage road. It's all happening now. The UN passes a resolution, God laughs, and a new discovery is dug up about that claim to Jerusalem. Folks, when you combine the truth of the Bible with irrefutable archaeological and scientific evidence like you're getting every single day, you have an unbeatable combination. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He's got his eye on his land and his people. He's got his eye on this summit because he's in it. Thank you guys for coming. Nikki Haley tonight. Get your second wins. God bless you. See you tonight.
Now you know why we make Eric our closer. In closing, a couple of things. Doors open tonight at 6:30. We want everyone in their seats a little after 7. We'll go live at 7:30 with Ambassador Nikki Haley. Thank you, and we'll see you tonight.